The galaxy was old. It had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a shore. It had watched species discover fire, then light speed, then each other. And through all of it, the Galactic Council had kept the peace, not through strength, but through patience, compromise, and a deep belief that every conflict could be solved with enough talking. Humanity had joined the Council 40 years ago. In galactic terms, that was nothing, a blink. Most species had been members for thousands of years. They looked at humans the way an old professor might look at a loud child who had wandered into a library. Curious, slightly annoyed, mostly unimpressed. Ambassador Quan Unji knew this. She felt it every time she walked into the council chambers on Nexara, the great station world that floated between 3 star systems like a pearl suspended in black water. The chamber itself was enormous. A curved hall built to hold representatives of over 200 species, each seated in sections designed for their particular body types. Some breathed methane. Some had no legs. Some communicated through light pulses instead of sound. And all of them, without exception, looked at Unji like she was temporary. She didn't mind. She had been a diplomat long enough to know that respect was not given. It was taken. Slowly, carefully, and usually at a moment no one expected. That moment was coming. It started with a distress signal from a species called the Povan. They were gentle creatures, tall, 6-limbed herbivores who lived on farming worlds along the outer rim of Council space. They had no military. They had no enemies. They grew crops, raised their young, and believed deeply that the universe was a kind place. For most of their history, they had been right. The signal came from their colony world, Pova 3. It was short, broken, and filled with static and screaming. The Drukon dominance, a reptilian empire known for its cruelty, had invaded. 22 warships had entered orbit. Ground troops had landed. And within hours, the Drukon had rounded up 11,000 Povan civilians and placed them in camps surrounded by armed soldiers. Then the Drukon broadcast their demands to the entire galaxy. Surrender 3 bordering star systems, or the hostages would die. 100 every cycle, no exceptions. The Council reacted the way the Council always reacted. Emergency session, speeches, proposals, subcommittees. Councillor Tavine, the senior representative of the Marathi Collective and one of the oldest voices in the chamber, stood and gave a long address about the importance of measured response. He proposed offering the Drukon partial territorial concessions, a small price, he said, for 11,000 lives. Several species agreed immediately. It was, after all, how things had always been done. The Drukon had pulled this exact move before, 14 times in 3 centuries. Each time, the Council had negotiated, offered something, and the hostages had been released, minus a few hundred who died during the process. Those deaths were filed under acceptable losses, and the galaxy moved on. Yunji sat in her seat and listened. She listened to every word. She watched the chamber nod along to Tavine's calm, reasonable voice. She watched species who had existed for 10,000 years agree, once again, to reward a murderer for murdering. And she felt something cold settle in her chest. She did not speak during the session. She did not raise an objection. She simply waited until the session broke for recess, walked to her private office on the station, and opened a secure channel to Earth. Fleet Admiral Han Min-jae answered on the second signal. He was an old man, with a face like carved stone, and eyes that had seen too much. He had commanded ships in 3 conflicts, and buried friends on 4 worlds. He did not smile often. He did not need to. "You've seen the broadcast," Unji said. It was not a question. "I have," Min-jae replied. "The Council is going to negotiate. They're going to give the Drukon what they want, again." Min-jae was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And us?" Unji closed her eyes. She thought about the Povan, a species so gentle they didn't even have a word for war. She thought about the 100 hostages who would die in the next cycle, while the council debated room assignments for a negotiation team. She thought about the 14 times this had happened before, and all the lives that had been quietly erased so the galaxy could pretend it had kept the peace. "Send the Iron Orchid," she said. "Send everything we have in range." "Understood." The channel closed. Unji sat alone in her office for a long time. She knew what she had just set in motion. She knew what the galaxy would think. She knew there would be consequences, political, diplomatic, maybe worse. But she also knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic, that some lines could not be crossed and then talked about afterward. 6 hours later, and half a galaxy away, Captain Yoon Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the UESS Iron Orchid. It was humanity's most decorated warship, sleek, black, and built for one purpose. Do-hyun himself was a tall man with a quiet face and steady hands. He rarely raised his voice. He never needed to. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Park So-yeon, handed him the orders on a datapad. She was sharp-featured and quick-eyed, the kind of officer who saw 3 moves ahead and planned for 5. She watched Do-hyun read the orders. She watched him read them again. "How many ships?" he asked. 6 warships, 2 carrier groups, full marine division. "The 4th strike is already loading," So-yeon answered. Do-hyun set the pad down. He looked out the bridge viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, 11,000 innocent people were waiting for someone to come. The galaxy had decided to send a negotiation team. Humanity had decided to send something else. Do-hyun turned to So-yeon. His expression was calm, his voice was steady, and his eyes held something that anyone who had ever served with him knew to respect and fear. "Wake the fleet," he said. The council session resumed the next morning. 200 species filed back into the great chamber, took their seats, and prepared for another round of careful, measured discussion. Outside the tall windows, the stars burned quietly. Inside, the air smelled like compromise. Councillor Tavine opened with a proposal. He had spent the night drafting it, a formal offer to the Drukon dominance that included partial control of 2 border systems, a trade agreement, and a polite request to release the hostages. He read it in his slow, musical voice, and the chamber listened with the comfortable silence of beings who had heard this kind of thing 1,000 times before. Ambassador Kwon Eun-ji let him finish. She sat perfectly still in the human section, a small area near the back of the chamber, because junior species did not get front-row seats. When Tavine was done, she raised her hand and asked for the floor. He expected a question, maybe a minor objection. What he got was something else entirely. Eun-ji stood. She smoothed her uniform, and she asked one question. How many times has this council rewarded the Drukon for taking hostages? The chamber went very quiet. Not the quiet of attention, but the quiet of discomfort. The kind that fills a room when someone says out loud what everyone has been thinking, but no one wants to hear. Tavine blinked his 4 eyes slowly. I don't see how that is relevant to the current. How many times? Eun-ji repeated. A long silence. Then a representative from the data archives spoke up in a thin, careful voice. 14 incidents in the last 312 standard years. And how many hostages died during those 14 negotiations? Another pause. Approximately 6,000 across all incidents. Eun-ji nodded. She let the number hang in the air, like smoke. Then she said, Humanity will not participate in any negotiation that rewards hostage-taking. Tavine leaned forward. Then you are abstaining from the process? No, Eun-ji said. We are responding to it. Before Tavine could ask what that meant, A tactical alert flashed across every screen in the chamber. A human battle group, 6 warships, 2 carrier groups, and a full marine assault division had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the POVA system. The chamber erupted. Species shouted in a dozen languages. Translators struggled to keep up. Tevin stared at Yunji with something between shock and horror. "You cannot do this," he said. "This is not how we resolve conflict." Yunji looked at him steadily. "You resolve conflict by paying murderers and counting the dead as acceptable. We don't." She sat down. Half a galaxy away, the Iron Orchid led the battle group into the POVA system at full speed. Captain Yoon Do-hyun stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind his back, watching the tactical display paint the picture ahead. 22 Drukhon warships in orbit around POVA 3. Heavy weapons platforms, troop transports on the surface. The planet itself was a soft green world with wide plains and silver rivers. A farming colony that had never known violence until a week ago. Lieutenant Commander Park So-yeon stood beside him, her eyes moving across data feeds with the focused intensity of someone who had already fought this battle in her head 6 different ways. Their formation is standard Drukhon, heavy front, weak flanks. They don't expect anyone to actually come. They've never had a reason to expect it, Do-hyun said. On the lower deck, Ensign Baek Ji-seok sat at his communication station and tried to keep his hands from shaking. He was 23 years old. He had graduated from the academy 8 months ago. His job was to monitor and route communications, which sounded simple until you realized that in a battle, communications were the difference between coordination and chaos. Ji-seok had started keeping a journal when he first boarded the Iron Orchid. He wrote in it every night, small observations, thoughts, things he wanted to remember. That morning, before the fleet dropped out of light speed, he had written, "I joined the fleet because I believed in something. Today I find out if that something believes in me." Now he listened as Do-hyun opened a single broadcast channel to the Drukhon fleet commander. The captain's voice was calm, unhurried, and absolutely clear. "This is Captain Yoon Do-hyun of the United Earthship Iron Orchid, speaking to the commander of the Drukhon forces in the POVA system. You are holding 11,000 POVAN civilians hostage. You will release them, all of them, unharmed. You have 1 standard cycle to comply." He did not say "or else." He did not make threats. He simply stated what was going to happen, the way someone might state that the sun would rise. The Drukhon commander responded almost immediately. His voice was deep, rough, and full of the kind of confidence that comes from centuries of never being challenged. He laughed, a harsh barking sound, and called Do-hyun a fool. He said the humans were children playing at war. He said the council would stop them. Then, to prove his point, he ordered 50 POVAN hostages brought before the broadcast cameras. They were thin, shaking, their 6 limbs bound with metal cables. Some of them were very young. The Drukhon soldiers opened fire. 50 bodies fell. The feed was broadcast live to the council, to the Iron Orchid, and to every ship in the human fleet. On the bridge of the Iron Orchid, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the ship's engines and the distant echo of the broadcast cutting to static. Ji-seok felt something crack inside his chest. Not fear, not anger, something deeper. The sound of innocence meeting reality and breaking apart like glass. Park So-yeon's jaw was tight. Her hands were steady on her console, but her knuckles were white. Captain Yoon Do-hyun watched the feed until it ended. His expression did not change. His breathing did not quicken. He stood perfectly still, like a man carved from stone. But something in his eyes shifted. A door closing, a decision made, a line that could never be uncrossed. He turned to So-yeon. "Time's up," he said. So-yeon's fingers moved across her console. Across the fleet, weapon systems armed. 6 warships turned their bows toward the Drukhon formation, like wolves turning toward prey. Jisiuk gripped the edge of his station and whispered something his grandmother used to say back on Earth. A small prayer for the living and the dead. The iron orchid surged forward, and the stars seemed to hold their breath. The first Drukan warship died in silence. One moment it was holding formation, its shields bright and its guns tracking the incoming human fleet. The next moment, 3 precision strikes from the iron orchid punched through its hull in places the Drukan had never thought to armor. Power junctions, shield generators, fuel lines. The ship folded inward like a crushed can, and broke apart in a slow, silent bloom of fire and metal. The Drukan fleet had exactly 4 seconds to understand what was happening. They did not use those seconds well. Park Soyeon had spent the entire approach running calculations. She knew every ship in the Drukan formation by class, by armament, by shield frequency. She had mapped their communication relays, their command structure, their likely retreat vectors. And she had built a battle plan that was not designed to win a fight. It was designed to end one. Carrier groups launch, she ordered. Close the flanks. From the 2 human carriers, dozens of smaller strike craft poured out like hornets from a kicked nest. They split into groups of 4 and swept wide, curving around the Drukan formation on both sides. The Drukan tried to turn to face them, but that was exactly what Soyeon wanted, because the moment they turned, they exposed their rears to the main battle line. Dohun gave his only order. No escape. None of them leave. The Iron Orchid and its 5 sister ships drove straight into the center of the Drukan fleet like a fist through a paper wall. The battle was fast. It was violent. And it was shockingly one-sided. The Drukan were not weak. Their ships were large, well-armed, and crewed by soldiers who had spent their lives training for war. But they had spent centuries fighting species who didn't fight back, or who fought back just enough to make a point before retreating to the negotiation table. They had never faced an enemy that came at them with full force and zero hesitation. Human ships fought differently. They moved in tight, coordinated patterns, each ship covering the others, each captain trusting the plan and the officer beside them. When a Drukan ship fired at one human vessel, 2 others hit it from angles it couldn't defend. When a Drukan captain tried to break formation and run, strike craft were already waiting on the escape route. On the council station, representatives of 200 species watched the live tactical feeds in total silence. The battle was being broadcast on open channels. The humans had not bothered to encrypt their movements. They wanted the galaxy to see. Councillor Tavine stood frozen at his seat. His 4 eyes were wide, each one tracking a different part of the battle. He had lived for over 400 years. He had watched wars from a distance many times. But he had never seen anything like this. The calm, methodical precision with which the human fleet took apart a force that outnumbered them nearly 4-1. Within 30 minutes, 14 Drukan warships were destroyed. 6 more were disabled and drifting. The remaining 2 tried to surrender. The humans accepted, immediately, cleanly, without cruelty. The moment a Drukan ship dropped its shields and powered down its weapons, the firing stopped. Not a single additional shot was fired at a surrendering vessel. But the space battle was only half the plan. Below, on the surface of Pova 3, the real fight was just beginning. Sergeant Major Lee Chae-won had been a Marine for 16 years. She was not tall. She was not loud. She was the kind of person you might walk past on a street and never notice, right up until the moment she decided you should. She led the 4th Marine Strike Division, and her soldiers had a nickname that they had earned in blood: the Reapers. The drop pods launched from the carriers while the space battle was still raging above. 40 pods, each carrying a squad of Marines, burned through the atmosphere of Pova 3 like meteors. The Drukan ground forces saw them coming and opened fire with anti-air batteries. 3 pods were hit. 2 of them kept going anyway, damaged, trailing smoke, but still falling exactly where they were supposed to fall. Chaewon's pod hit the ground 50 meters from the largest hostage camp. She was out before the dust settled, weapon up, moving forward. Behind her, her squad fanned out, with the practiced ease of people who had rehearsed this 100 times. The camps were ugly. The Drukan had built them fast. Metal fences, guard towers, open ground with no shelter. Inside, thousands of Povan civilians huddled together in groups, their 6 limbs pulled close to their bodies, their wide eyes full of a fear that had lasted for days without end. Corporal Shin Tae-yong was 20 years old, and this was his first real operation. His hands were shaking inside his gloves. His heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his teeth. He had trained for this. He had scored high on every simulation. But simulations did not shake the ground under your feet. Simulations did not make your stomach twist with the smell of smoke and blood. He followed Chaewon through the breach in the camp fence. Drukan soldiers fired from guard towers. The Marine beside Taeyong went down, hit in the shoulder, spinning, falling. Taeyong grabbed him, pulled him behind cover, and returned fire in the same motion. Something clicked into place inside him. Some ancient human mechanism that turned fear into focus. The fighting was close and brutal. Marines cleared the camps building by building, tower by tower. They were careful, terrifyingly careful. Every shot was aimed. Every grenade was placed. The Povan hostages were everywhere, and the Marines moved around them like water flowing around stones, never putting a civilian in danger, even when it meant putting themselves in more. Chaewon reached the central command building of the largest camp. Inside, the Drukan ground commander stood with a weapon pointed at a group of Povan children. He was screaming orders that nobody was left to follow. Chaewon did not negotiate. She did not shout a warning. She put a single round through his weapon hand from 30 meters away while walking forward. The gun clattered to the floor. The commander screamed. Chaewon stepped over him, checked the children, and called for medics. Back on the council station, Councillor Taveen turned to Ambassador Kwan Unji. His voice was barely a whisper. "What are you?" Unji looked at him. She did not smile, she did not gloat. Her eyes were tired and sad and utterly certain. "We're the species that doesn't count acceptable losses," she said. On the Iron Orchid, Ensign Baek Ji-seok monitored the communication channels as the battle wound down. The Drukan military frequencies were chaos. Panicked voices, broken orders, desperate calls for help that would never come. But through the noise, Ji-seok picked up something else. Transmissions from Drukan ships in other sectors. Ships that had nothing to do with this fight. They were asking each other the same question, over and over, in tones that Ji-seok had never heard from a Drukan voice before. They were asking, what did the humans just do? And underneath the question, in the way their voices cracked and their words stumbled, Ji-seok heard something the galaxy had never associated with the Drukan dominance. Fear. The numbers arrived before the dust had settled on Pova 3. They spread across the galaxy like ripples in still water. And every species that read them went very, very quiet. 22 Drukan warships engaged, 20 destroyed, 2 captured, 0 human ships lost, 3 damaged, all repairable. The entire space battle had lasted 41 minutes. On the ground, all 11 hostage camps were secured in under 3 hours. Of the 11,000 Povan civilians who had been held captive, 10,814 were alive. The 186 who were gone had been killed before the human fleet arrived, before anyone came at all. And then the number that confused the galaxy more than anything else. 0 Drukan prisoners harmed after surrender. Not one. The humans had captured over 300 Drukan soldiers on the ground, and 1,400 crew from the 2 surrendered warships. Every single one of them was treated according to human military protocol, disarmed, processed, given food, water, and medical attention. The same Marines who had fought their way through those camps with fire and fury had, the moment the shooting stopped, set up field hospitals that treated Drukhon wounded right beside their own injured. Corporal Shin Taeyong, who had taken a piece of metal in his leg during the ground assault, sat on a medical cot next to a Drukhon soldier whose arm he had broken 2 hours earlier. Neither of them spoke. But the human medic treated them both the same. The galaxy did not know what to do with this. On the council station, the emergency session had been going for 18 straight hours. The chamber was in chaos, not the organized chaos of debate, but the raw, unstructured chaos of beings who had just watched their entire understanding of the universe shift under their feet. The Drukhon dominance, predictably, demanded that the council condemn humanity for unprovoked military aggression. Their ambassador, a thick-scaled creature with cold yellow eyes, stood before the chamber and called the human attack a violation of galactic law, an act of war, and a threat to the stability of the council itself. Ambassador Quan Ianji listened to this speech with the patience of a woman who had been expecting it. When the Drukhon ambassador finished, she asked for the floor. "The representative of the Drukhon dominance calls our response unprovoked," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I would like to remind this council that the Drukhon invaded a peaceful world, took 11,000 civilians hostage, and executed 50 of them on a live broadcast while laughing. If that is not provocation, then the word has no meaning." Several species shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but not everyone was on humanity's side. Councillor Tavine, still shaken, still processing what he had seen, rose to speak. He did not defend the Drukhon, but he questioned the method. "The council exists to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral action," he said. "If every species responds to every crisis with military force, we will tear this galaxy apart." It was a fair point. Yunji acknowledged it. And then she gave the speech that would be remembered for a very long time. She stepped forward to the center of the chamber floor, a place where junior species almost never stood. She looked around at 200 representatives from 200 worlds, and she spoke simply, in plain words, without drama or decoration. "My species is young," she said. "You remind us of this often, and you are right. We have been among the stars for barely 2 centuries. Many of you have been here for thousands of years. You have built something remarkable. A council, a system, a way of talking to each other instead of killing each other. We respect that. We truly do." She paused. "But we did not come to this council without a history of our own. Humanity has fought wars that burned entire continents. We have committed acts against ourselves so terrible that we built monuments just to make sure we never forgot them. We learned our lessons the hardest way possible, by living through them, by burying our dead and swearing every single time that we would do better." Her voice dropped, and the translators across the chamber adjusted to catch every word. "And one of the lessons we learned, one that we paid for with more blood than most of you can imagine, is this. You do not negotiate with those who murder the innocent for leverage. Not because negotiation is weakness. It is not. Negotiation is a tool, and a good one. But when you reward someone for killing hostages, you are not saving lives. You are setting the price for the next group of hostages. And the next. And the next." She looked directly at Tavine. 14 times. 300 years. 6,000 dead. And the Drukhon kept coming back because every single time this council told them that hostage-taking works. We are not the ones who created this cycle, but we are the ones who ended it. The chamber was silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of before, but something deeper. The silence of beings thinking, really thinking, for the first time in a very long while. Yunji finished with words that would be quoted across the galaxy for generations. You have called us young. You have called us reckless. But we are the only species in this chamber that turned its own history into a warning label. And we are the only ones who read it. No one spoke for a long time. On the Druken homeworld, far from the council and its debates, the ruling council of the dominants sat in their war chamber and watched recordings of the battle at Pova 3. They watched their ships come apart. They watched their soldiers surrender to creatures half their size. They watched the speed, the coordination, the absolute refusal to hesitate. The Druken had ruled through fear for 1,000 years. They understood it better than anyone in the galaxy, and they recognized it now, not in themselves, but in the cold efficiency of the species that had just dismantled their fleet in less than an hour. For the first time in their imperial history, the Druken ruling council issued a formal order to recall all forward military operations. Every fleet, every occupied territory, every border dispute. Not because they had changed, because they were afraid. That night, on the Iron Orchid, Ensign Baek Jisok sat at his small desk in his quarters and opened his journal. The ship was quiet. The battle was over. The rescued Povan civilians were being transported to medical ships. The Drukon prisoners were in holding cells, alive and unharmed. Jisok stared at the blank page for a long time. Then he wrote, I used to wonder if humanity had a place among the stars. Today, I think the stars are still figuring out what to do with us. He closed the journal and turned off the light. Outside his small window, the stars burned on, ancient, patient, and watching. 6 months passed, and the galaxy changed in ways that no one had predicted, least of all the humans who had started it. The Druken dominance did not collapse. It did something worse from its own perspective. It shrank. The recall of military operations was supposed to be temporary, a pause while the ruling council figured out how to respond to a galaxy that was suddenly looking at them differently. But the pause became a problem. Species that the Druken had held under their boot for centuries saw the recordings from Pova 3. They saw the mighty Druken fleet torn apart in less than an hour, and for the first time they thought, maybe they can be beaten. Revolts began on 3 occupied worlds within the first month. By the 3rd month, 7 enslaved populations had declared independence. The Drukon sent ships to crush them, and then pulled those ships back when they realized that every news feed in the galaxy was watching, and that somewhere, in some part of space, a human fleet might be watching too. The Drukon began releasing their slaves. Not all at once, not willingly, but steadily, grudgingly, with the sullen reluctance of a bully who has just discovered that someone bigger is standing behind him. They did not do it because they had become good. They did it because holding slaves had become expensive in a galaxy that was no longer willing to look the other way. 3 other aggressive species, smaller empires that had been pushing border disputes and threatening their neighbors for decades, quietly pulled back their forces. No announcements, no treaties. They simply stopped. The galaxy noticed. The galaxy understood why. On the council station, the political aftermath was messier. Some species praised humanity. Others feared them. A significant number did both at the same time. There were formal protests, closed-door meetings, and a great deal of nervous whispering in corridors. The question that echoed through every delegation was the same. If humans did this once, will they do it again? And the answer that frightened everyone was, yes, if they have to. Ambassador Quan Unji spent those 6 months doing the hardest work of her career, not fighting, but building. She drafted a proposal, revised it 40 times, argued for it in committee after committee, and slowly, painfully, brought it to the council floor. She called it the Pova Accords. The idea was simple, even if the politics were not. A unified military response doctrine for the Galactic Council. When a species took hostages or attacked civilians, the Council would respond, not with negotiations, not with concessions, but with force. Measured force, proportional force, but force nonetheless. The days of acceptable losses were over. Councillor Tavine opposed it. Of course he did. He was a being of diplomacy and tradition, and this proposal cut against everything he had spent his long life defending. He argued against it in session after session, his musical voice filling the chamber with warnings about the danger of militarizing the council. But something had shifted inside Tavine, even if he was not ready to admit it. He had watched those 50 Povan hostages die on the broadcast. He had counted the 6,000 dead across 14 previous incidents. And he had begun to wonder, late at night in his quarters, when no one was watching, whether his tradition of patience had become a tradition of permission. In the end, Tavine did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He co-authored the final draft of the Pova Accords alongside Yunji. He added provisions for diplomatic channels, for warnings, for every chance at peaceful resolution before force was used. He made it better. And when the vote came, he voted yes. The accords passed with the largest majority in council history. Captain Yoon Do-hyun did not attend any of the political sessions. He had no taste for speeches. When the Iron Orchid was placed in dock for repairs and upgrades, he took a small transport ship and flew to Pova 3. The colony was rebuilding. The Povan people worked slowly, carefully, the way they did everything, with patience and a quiet belief that broken things could be made whole. New structures were going up where the camps had been. Fields that had been trampled by Drukan soldiers were being replanted. Life was returning, one green shoot at a time. Near the center of the largest forward camp, the Povan had built a memorial. It was simple. A ring of white stones arranged in a circle, with smaller stones inside, representing each of the human Marines who had died during the rescue. There were 17 of them, 17 humans who had given their lives to free a species they had never met, on a world they had never visited. Do-hyun stood before the memorial for a long time. He read each name. He knew every one of them. He had written letters to every one of their families. His hand rested at his side, and if it trembled slightly, there was no one close enough to see. A young Povan child approached him. The child was small, barely waist height, with wide dark eyes and 6 thin limbs that moved with the uncertain grace of youth. The child looked up at Do-hyun, and through a small translation device hung around its neck, asked a question. "Why did you come? No one else came." Do-hyun looked down at the child. He was not a man who showed his emotions easily. His crew knew him as calm, steady, sometimes distant. But something in this small creature's question reached a place inside him that he usually kept locked away. He knelt down so that his eyes were level with the child's, and he said, in a voice that was very quiet and very clear, "Because someone should have come the first time." The child did not fully understand what that meant, but it reached out one thin limb and touched Do-hyun's hand, and Do-hyun let it stay there. Far away, the rest of the galaxy kept turning. Lee Chae-won received a promotion and a new command. She accepted both without ceremony, and immediately began training her next group of Marines. Shin Tae-yeon, who had gone into the camps as a boy and come out as something harder and sadder and more certain, re-enlisted the day his contract allowed. When asked why, he said simply, "Because someone has to." Park So-yeon began writing a tactical manual based on the Battle of Pova 3. Within a year, it became required reading at every military academy in council space, human and alien. She called it principles of protective engagement. Soyeon never liked the attention. She preferred her simulations. Counselor Tavine sought out Eunji one evening, weeks after the accords had passed. They sat together in a small observation lounge on the council station, looking out at the stars. Tavine was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. "I have lived for 430 years, he said. "I have spent most of that time believing that patience and compromise could solve any problem. I thought your species was too angry to be trusted, too young, too loud." He paused. "I think now that you are angry because you remember what it costs to do nothing." Eunji looked at him. "We remember because we can't afford to forget." Tavine nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is what the galaxy has been missing. Not more patience, but more memory." They sat together in comfortable silence and watched the stars. Months later, the Iron Orchid finished its refit and prepared to depart POVA 3 for its next assignment. The crew assembled on deck. The ship hummed with fresh power and old purpose. Ensign Baek Ji-seok stood on the observation deck as the ship pulled away from orbit. POVA 3 grew smaller in the viewport, a soft green world that had been hurt and was healing. Below, somewhere among the new buildings and fresh fields, a ring of white stones held the names of 17 people who would never come home. Ji-seok opened his journal one final time. He thought about everything that had happened. The battle, the fear, the dead, the living, the silence of the council, and the roar of the guns, and the small hand of a Povan child reaching out to touch a soldier who had come from the other side of the galaxy to help. He picked up his pen and wrote the last lines. "The galaxy sent us a warning when we arrived. Be quiet, be small, be grateful. We sent one back. Don't hurt the defenseless and expect us to watch. They're still learning which warning matters more." He closed the journal, put down his pen, and looked out at the stars. The Iron Orchid turned its bow toward the deep black and surged forward, carrying its crew into whatever came next. Steady, unafraid, and exactly where they were supposed to be.